I watched Bethany and Ethan step out of his place, her hand still resting on his arm. Her eyes found mine and the color drained from her face, leaving her exposed, a deer caught in high beams. Ethan started to raise a hand, but I cut him off. "Neither of you are worth wasting my time on," I said, the words tasting like ash. The quiet street hummed with the sound of a distant lawnmower. I sat on the hood of my '98 Taurus, the metal still warm from the afternoon sun, watching. Ethan's porch light cast long shadows, even though it was barely dusk. Bethany's hand lingered on his forearm as they stepped out, the gesture too casual for a simple goodbye between old friends. When her eyes met mine, a switch flipped. The flush of color vanished from her cheeks, leaving her skin stark white, like fresh snow. Her gaze flicked away, landing on her shoes, then the sidewalk, anywhere but me. Ethan, slow to catch on, started to lift his hands, a placating gesture, as if to calm a dog. It was too late for that. The words came out flat, hollow. "Neither of you are worth wasting my time on," I said, and the silence that followed was heavy, thicker than the humid air. I didn't wait for a reply. I just slid off the hood, opened the door, and got in, leaving the idling engine to speak for itself. The Taurus coughed to life, and I pulled away without looking back. The image of her face, drained and guilty, stuck in my mind, even as the houses blurred past. It wasn't the first time that look had crossed her features. Not lately, anyway. The first time I saw something like it, a flicker of deceit behind her eyes, was weeks ago, though I hadn't known what it was then. It took me back, a long rewind, to a time when trust wasn't something you had to question. Ethan and I met when we were 8. His family moved into the brick ranch house 2 doors down from ours. He had a chipped front tooth and a baseball glove he'd already broken in. We spent that first summer tearing through the neighborhood on bikes, building tree forts, and digging holes to china in our backyards. We joined the Little League team together, Ethan pitching fastballs and me catching behind the plate. He was always there, a steady presence. Whether we were arguing over who got the last cookie or strategizing a win in the state soccer finals. Through junior high, then high school, our lockers were always close. We shared homework answers, stories about our parents, and the secret anxieties of growing up in a small Michigan town. Ethan was more than a friend. He was family, the brother I never had. We had each other's backs, no matter what. That was just how it was. Bethany entered the picture in 10th grade. She was new to our high school, transferred from downstate. Her laugh was easy, and her hair always seemed to catch the light just right. I asked her out to the homecoming dance, and we were together from that night until graduation. Ethan started dating Clara Olson a few months later. Clara was quiet, her blonde hair always pulled back in a neat ponytail. She was a good balance for Ethan's boisterous nature. We double-dated constantly, going to the movies, the local diner, sometimes just driving around on Friday nights. Prom night was a blur of cheap tuxedos and rented limos. Ethan and I had booked 2 adjoining rooms at the Ramada Inn outside of town. The walls between us were thin enough to hear muffled whispers and soft laughter. It was a shared intimacy, a confirmation of the world we'd built. 4 of us against everything else. Graduation came and went. Ethan joined the Navy, shipping out 3 weeks after we got our diplomas. Clara stood on the tarmac, her hand pressed to the chain-link fence, tears in her eyes as she promised to wait for him. I went to Eastern Michigan University for civil engineering, a practical choice. Bethany was accepted into the University of Michigan's IT program. We were only a half hour apart, close enough for weekend visits, far enough to live separate lives. It felt like a good compromise, a way to grow without growing apart. But the distance, short as it was, started to feel like a chasm. The phone calls grew shorter, her answers vaguer. Whispers from mutual friends drifted back to me. Someone had seen Bethany at a party, dancing a little too close with a guy from her dorm. Another time, at a bar in Ann Arbor, she was spotted leaving with someone else. I'd shake them off, these rumors, telling myself people talked, people exaggerated. Bethany was busy, that was all. University life was different from high school. We were just adjusting. Then, a Tuesday evening, I drove to Ann Arbor to surprise her, planning to take her out to dinner. I saw her silver Civic pulling out of her dorm parking lot. Not alone. A man was in the passenger seat, his head turned towards her as she drove. I followed them, keeping a few cars between us, all the way to a small Italian place on the outskirts of campus. They settled into a booth, tucked away near the back. He leaned across the table, his arm draped casually over her shoulder. She smiled at him, a wide, genuine smile I hadn't seen directed at me in weeks. They talked, laughed. He touched her hair. My gut twisted, a knot tightening with each passing minute. I watched them for what felt like an hour, sitting at a table near the door, nursing a lukewarm glass of water. It was the sound of my voice asking the waitress for the check that made her head snap up. Her eyes, wide and startled, met mine. The color drained from her face then, just like it did tonight. She quickly pushed the man's arm off her shoulder. He looked at her, confused, then followed her gaze to me. I paid the bill, leaving the money on the table, and walked out without another word. The confrontation would wait. We had a date planned for Friday night. Friday arrived, cool and clear, but I stayed in my apartment. The evening stretched out, quiet and empty, a contrast to the usual anticipation before a date with Bethany. I had shut off my phone shortly after my last class, letting the battery drain down to nothing. The silence felt heavy, but also strangely liberating. There would be polls, voicemails, no doubt. But for now, I didn't have to hear them. I ate a microwave dinner and watched an old baseball game, the deliberate choice to inflict a small, reciprocal hurt feeling like a dull ache in my own chest. It wasn't satisfying, not in the way I'd imagined. It was just a cold fact. The doorbell jolted me awake Saturday morning. It was still early, the weak Michigan sun just beginning to cut through the blinds. I pulled on a t-shirt and went to the door. Bethany stood on the landing, her hair a bit disheveled, her eyes sharp. She wore jeans and a U of M sweatshirt, looking less polished than usual. "Where were you?" she demanded, stepping inside without an invitation. Her voice was tight. "My phone blew up your voicemail. I called all night." I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms. "I was here." My voice was flat. Didn't feel like going out. She stared at me, her expression a mix of anger and confusion. "Didn't feel like it?" "We had plans, Caleb, big plans. You just stood me up." "I saw you Tuesday," I said, cutting her off, my gaze steady. "At the Italian place, with your friend." The color drained from her face again, just like it had at the restaurant, and then on Ethan's porch. Her eyes darted away, searching for an escape. "What? Oh, him? That's just Mike. From my psych class, he needed a ride." She tried for casual, but her voice wavered. "It wasn't a date, Caleb. We were just getting some food." "He had his arm around you," I stated, my voice still even. "You seem pretty comfortable with that. If it was just food with just Mike, why didn't you introduce me or invite me to sit down?" She shifted her weight, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "It was awkward. You just showed up. And it was nothing. He's just an acquaintance." "An acquaintance you've been seen with before," I countered, the words coming out without effort. "I've heard things, Bethany. For weeks, I dismissed them. Thought people were just talking." "Guess not." Her jaw tightened. "What do you mean, heard things?" she challenged, her voice rising. "People talk. You know that. Gossip. People don't usually gossip about their friends seeing other people when they're supposed to be in a relationship," I said, pushing off the doorframe. "Or maybe our definition of relationship is different now." She squared her shoulders. "Look, Caleb, we're in college now. Things are different. We're not high school kids anymore. We weren't exclusive. You know that." The words hit harder than any accusation. "Not exclusive?" I echoed, the phrase tasting like rust. "All those talks about our future, the ring, the sweater, was that just high school too?" The gold ring I'd given her, her favorite sweatshirt with my name stitched into the collar, symbols that now felt meaningless. She shrugged, a small dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. "It was high school, Caleb. We both needed to grow up. See what else was out there." Her voice was getting colder, harder. A strange calm settled over me then, a clear, sharp certainty. "Good to know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because I met a girl at a frat party last weekend. Maggie Hayes. Got her number." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I hadn't called her. Not yet. Bethany's eyes narrowed, a sudden flicker of something like betrayal crossing her face. "You did what?" she hissed, the anger returning, sharper this time. Her voice was low and dangerous. Fine, she spat, taking a step back toward the door. Go ahead, I don't care. She pulled the door open and was gone, the heavy click of the latch echoing in the sudden quiet of my apartment. A few days passed, my phone remained off, and I heard nothing from Bethany. The silence was a constant companion. On Wednesday, during a break between classes, I found myself with Maggie Hayes' number still folded in my wallet. I pulled it out, stared at the unfamiliar handwriting. With a deep breath, I turned my phone on. Her call was the first I made. We talked for 20 minutes, mostly about classes and campus life. I asked her out for Friday night. She said yes. Friday evening, Maggie suggested a party at a house near campus. It'll be good, she said, her voice light. A lot of people from my comms class. I agreed. The bass from the speakers vibrated through the floorboards as soon as we stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of cheap beer and sweat. We pushed through the crowd, heading for the kitchen. That's when I saw her, Bethany, in a corner, laughing, her hand resting on the same man's arm. Mike. Their heads were close together. It wasn't a casual acquaintance any longer. Maggie followed my gaze. Her smile faded. Oh, that's Miss Piggy, she said, her voice a low murmur beside me. Miss Piggy, I repeated, the name sounding foreign, vaguely demeaning. Maggie nodded, a knowing look on her face. Yeah, that's what some of the girls call her. She's got a reputation around campus for, being less than loyal to her boyfriends. She's been with a few guys while she was supposedly with others. It's kind of her thing. The party noise seemed to amplify the sting of Maggie's words. She's my ex, I told Maggie, my voice low, just for her. The guy she's with? That's the one I caught her with earlier this week. The admission felt raw, a wound opened anew. Maggie's eyes widened slightly. Then she gave a small, understanding nod. She didn't press for details, which I appreciated. She then pulled me towards the center of the room, her hand firm on my arm. Come on, let's go say hi to Hank and Susan. They're the hosts. As she led me, I could feel Bethany's gaze on us, a hot pinprick on my back. I didn't turn around. Maggie introduced me to Hank, a burly guy with a booming laugh, and Susan, quieter, with a kind smile. We talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular, the usual small talk of college parties. Then Maggie pulled me onto the makeshift dance floor. The music was loud, a throbbing rhythm that filled the space. We danced, shoulders brushing, hands finding easy places on waists and arms. I let the alcohol dull the edges of my thoughts, focusing on Maggie's infectious energy. She laughed freely, her head tilted back, and for a while I forgot about Bethany, about everything. When I glanced up, Bethany was still there, in the same corner, her eyes still on me. The man, Mike, seemed to be trying to engage her, but her attention was elsewhere. Maggie noticed too. She looks like she swallowed a lemon, she commented, a wry smile on her lips. Guess she doesn't like seeing you with someone else. I shrugged, forcing a nonchalant air. She's the one who decided we weren't exclusive. Her choice, not mine. It was a cold truth, and I felt a faint chill even as I spoke it. The evening with Maggie was a welcome distraction. She was different from Bethany. Direct, a little wild, but honest in a way I hadn't realized I craved. We started dating steadily after that. She kept me on my toes, always suggesting new places, new experiences. I found myself drawn to her energy, her willingness to speak her mind. As we spent more time together, I started to learn more about her life, the parts she hadn't revealed on our first few dates. She'd been married young, straight out of high school, to a guy who'd been drafted into the Army. It hadn't lasted. He'd been killed overseas, leaving her with a 2-year-old son, Jamie. The revelation hit me with a quiet force. It wasn't just Maggie, it was a whole life, already formed, already set. Meeting Jamie was another turning point. He was a bright kid, 6 years old, with eyes that seemed to take everything in. He was sensitive, a little shy at first, but he warmed up to me quickly. We played catch in the park, built elaborate Lego castles, and I found myself laughing more genuinely than I had in a long time. There was a simple, uncomplicated joy in his presence, a stark contrast to the tangled mess of my recent past. I grew fond of him, truly fond. But the idea of stepping into that role, being a father figure, a husband, at 21 felt monumental. It wasn't just a new relationship, it was a ready-made family. One evening, as we sat on her small porch swing, the crickets chirping around us, Maggie brought it up. "Caleb," she began, her voice soft, "I like you, a lot, but I'm not looking for just a casual thing, not with Jamie in the picture. I need someone who's ready for more." Her gaze was steady, unwavering. I looked out at the streetlights, blinking in the distance. I wasn't ready. Not for that kind of commitment, not for the weight of a family I hadn't built myself. My engineering degree was almost complete, and I'd been offered an entry-level position with a firm in San Jose, California. It was an escape, a clean break, a chance to start completely fresh. "I'm moving to California, Maggie," I told her, the words tasting like guilt. "The job offer is solid. I'm taking it." Her face fell, a shadow passing over her features. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, her eyes sad but understanding. Ending things with her and Jamie was hard, especially Jamie. The thought of him, his bright, trusting face, made my chest ache. But I told myself it was for the best, for both of us. My career path, my own future, had to come first. It was a selfish decision, perhaps, but it felt like the only one I could make. A month later, after I'd packed my bags and said my goodbyes to my parents, Ethan called. He was back, discharged from the Navy. "Man, it's good to be home," he said, his voice crackling with an energy I hadn't heard in years. "Clara's still waiting. We're talking about getting married. You believe that? And old man Davis from the hardware store retired. Things are changing." It was good to hear his voice, a familiar anchor in a sea of newness. California felt like a different world, vast and bright. I landed a small apartment in San Jose, the rent eating a good chunk of my entry-level salary, but the weather was a constant, clear blue sky. My new job in civil engineering was challenging, full of long hours and new responsibilities. I settled into a routine quickly: work, the gym, microwave dinners, and the occasional night out with colleagues. Dates happened sporadically, usually with women from work or apps, but none of them ever seemed to stick. There was no deep connection, no spark that went beyond polite conversation and shared meals. It was a comfortable loneliness, a life carved out for one. Ethan was the steady anchor to my past. He called regularly, sometimes late at night, his voice a familiar rumble over the phone line. He'd update me on the changing seasons in Michigan, the small town gossip, and the slow, predictable rhythm of home. He talked about his new job at the local lumber yard, the old guys he worked with, and the fishing trips he was planning. One evening, his voice took on a different tone, a quiet frustration that hummed beneath his words. "You won't believe it, Caleb," he started, a sigh escaping. Clara Olson got married." "Married?" I echoed, surprised. "I thought they were waiting for him." "Who to?" "Some rich guy," Ethan said, the words laced with something bitter. "Old money, I guess. Her family was all for it, said he could provide for her like I couldn't." The anger was clear now. "She just up and did it, never even told me herself. I heard it from her cousin." I didn't know what to say. "That's rough, man. I'm sorry." "Yeah, well," he grumbled. "She's not happy, though. I know it. I see her around town sometimes. She looks lost, like a ghost in her own skin." He paused, then his voice dropped, a hint of desperation in it. "I still love her, Caleb. I always did." "Ethan, she's married," I said, trying to inject some reason into the conversation. "You can't go chasing a married woman. That's a bad road to go down." He scoffed. "You don't understand, Caleb. You left. You got out. You don't see how she looks. She's trapped. I could make her happy. I know it." He dismissed my advice with a wave of his hand, even though I was 1,000 miles away. "She needs a reliable man, not some suit who probably doesn't even see her." My father passed away unexpectedly a year later, a heart attack, sudden and brutal. I flew back to Michigan for the funeral, the familiar landscape of bare trees and gray skies feeling both comforting and alien. Ethan was there, a solid presence, his arm around my shoulder as I stood by the grave. Later, at the reception at the church hall, I saw her, Clara. She was wearing a dark, elegant dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She sat alone at a table in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee. Her eyes, when they met mine, were distant, almost vacant. She gave a small, polite nod, but offered no smile. She looked exactly as Ethan described, beautiful but carrying a heavy, unseen weight. See, Ethan muttered to me later that evening, as we sat in his truck outside my childhood home, sipping beers. I told you, she's not happy. I'm going to talk to her, Caleb. I have to. She's married, Ethan, I reiterated, a tired ache in my voice. You could mess up her life. Your life. Think about it. The thought of him pursuing her, of the potential fallout, made me uneasy. It was a tangled web I didn't want him to get caught in. I am thinking about it, he insisted, taking a long swig of his beer. I'm thinking about how she looks, how she used to look. We belonged together, I know it. The funeral was a strange reunion. I ran into Bethany's sister, Sarah, near the end of the reception. She still had the same kind eyes, though lines of stress were etched around them now. We exchanged polite condolences, and then the conversation naturally drifted to Bethany. Bethany? Sarah sighed, a tired sound. She's still around here, works at the bank. Things didn't exactly go to plan for her after college. She thought she'd be living in Chicago by now, working for some big tech firm. She's still with Mike on and off, I guess. It's complicated. She offered a small, apologetic smile. Life, right? I nodded, absorbing the news. Bethany still in Michigan, still with the same guy she'd cheated on me with. The irony wasn't lost on me. It brought a strange mix of relief and melancholy. Relief that I wasn't tied to that path, and melancholy for the simpler times that were now irrevocably gone, replaced by complex, imperfect realities. The next day, I packed my bags again, said goodbye to my mother, and headed back to the anonymous comfort of California. A few months after my father's funeral, Ethan called again, his voice buzzing with a mix of triumph and nerves. "You're not going to believe this, Caleb," he practically shouted into the phone. "Clara left him. She's here. She's living with me." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Ethan, what have you done?" I asked, the words heavy with foreboding. "She was married. This is going to cause problems. Big problems." "No, it won't," he insisted, though his bravado sounded thin. "She wasn't happy. She deserved more. We deserved to be together." He talked as if this was a victory, but all I could hear were the looming consequences. I warned him, tried to lay out the practical mess of it all, the legal battles, the social fallout, the cost of it, but he was high on the idea of reunion, deaf to reason. Despite my reservations, I flew back for their wedding 6 months later. It was a small affair at the local church, followed by a reception at a modest banquet hall. Clara looked radiant in her white dress, but there was an underlying tension in her smile, a subtle air of expectation. I watched her throughout the evening, how she subtly guided Ethan, how he eagerly catered to her every whim. She had a way of making her desires sound like his own ideas, a soft manipulation that was almost imperceptible unless you knew them both. Ethan, still deeply smitten, seemed blind to it, or perhaps chose to be. He just wanted to make her happy, to prove he was the reliable man she needed. Life in California continued its steady course. I met Sarah through work. She was an architect, quiet and thoughtful, with a dry wit that always made me laugh. There was a groundedness to her, a quiet strength that felt like solid earth beneath my feet. Our relationship grew slowly, naturally, without the dramatic highs and lows I'd known before. With Sarah, there was a stability, a calm, deep connection I hadn't realized I was missing. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony overlooking the Pacific, building a comfortable life together, rooted in shared interests and mutual respect. We bought a house with a small yard, adopted a dog, and settled into a quiet rhythm. Meanwhile, Ethan's calls grew more frequent, and their tone shifted. The early excitement was replaced by a familiar weariness. "She wants new furniture, Caleb," he complained one night, his voice strained, "and a new car. The one I have isn't good enough. I'm working doubles, and it's still not enough. She says I don't understand her needs." He sounded exhausted. "I warned you, Ethan," I said, a sense of resignation settling over me. "Clara likes a certain lifestyle. Her old husband could provide that. You knew that." "I thought love would be enough," he murmured, a defeated sigh. "She said she just wanted me. I believed her." But the reality was a heavy burden, and he was trapped in the choice he'd made. One evening he called with a new pitch. Clara found this guy, Caleb, says he has an opportunity, a real estate deal, quick money. We could flip these properties, get rich quick, get out of debt. He sounded desperate, clinging to a lifeline. Ethan, be careful, I urged him. That sounds too good to be true. Real estate, quick money? You could lose everything. I knew the signs, the desperation in his voice, the way Clara always seemed to be behind the big ideas. She says we have to do it, he said, his voice quiet. She's already told him we're in. We can't let her down. He was no longer trying to convince me. He was just stating a fact. The inevitable happened a few months later. The business deal, flimsy from the start, collapsed. The properties were underwater, tied up in legal battles, and the investors were left with nothing. Ethan and Clara found themselves in significant debt, worse off than before. The weight of it was crushing him. I could send you some money, Ethan, I offered during a particularly bleak phone call, just to help you get through this. It's not much, but it's something. No, he said, his voice flat with embarrassment. No, I appreciate it, but no, we'll figure it out. The pride was still there, however bruised. Their marriage, already strained, became a battleground. Their calls were punctuated by Clara's sharp criticisms, her discontent palpable even over the phone, and Ethan's weary attempts to placate her. The dream of a happy, reunited life was crumbling under the relentless pressure of bills and unmet expectations. He had chosen his path, and now he had to walk it. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. After 5 years in California, Sarah and I decided to move back to Michigan. My mother was getting older, and the distance felt too vast. We found a small house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood not far from my hometown, and I secured a good engineering position with a firm in Grand Rapids. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm, a stable existence that felt miles away from the tumultuous years of my youth. We ran into Ethan and Clara at a 4th of July community picnic in the town square. It was a warm, muggy afternoon, filled with the smell of grilling hot dogs and the buzz of conversation. Ethan looked tired, a little heavier than I remembered, but he greeted us with a genuine smile and a bear hug. Clara, however, seemed to have aged less. She was still striking, her eyes bright, and her laughter a little too loud. "Caleb Miller," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around me in a hug that lingered a moment too long. "Look at you, all grown up and successful." Her eyes, when they met mine, held a strange intensity. Sarah, standing beside me, shifted uncomfortably. "Good to see you, Clara," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, gently extracting myself from her embrace. As the afternoon wore on, Clara made a point of engaging me in conversation, her hand brushing my arm a little too often, her compliments a little too effusive. Sarah, usually so composed, grew visibly uneasy. I tried to dismiss it. "That's just Clara," I whispered to Sarah. "She's always been like that. Harmless." But Sarah's jaw remained tight, her gaze fixed on Clara. Ethan and Clara's financial troubles, which I'd only heard about over the phone, became starkly apparent once we were back in Michigan. The quick money scheme had left them in a deep hole. They started asking for loans, small at first, then larger. A few hundred for a car repair, then 1,000 for an overdue bill. Sarah grew increasingly concerned. "Caleb," she'd say, "we can't keep bailing them out. It's not healthy." And Clara, there's something about her. Clara started calling me too, more and more frequently. At first, it was about Ethan, about their struggles, framed as friendship or family. "Ethan's so stressed, Caleb," she'd say, her voice soft and confiding. "He just doesn't understand. I just need someone to talk to, you know?" Then the calls would subtly shift, becoming more personal, more intimate. She'd talk about her unhappiness, about feeling trapped, about Ethan's inability to understand her. There were hints of dissatisfaction, of a longing for something more than what her life with Ethan had become. I felt a genuine pang of sympathy for Ethan. I knew he was struggling, trying to keep his head above water, trying to make Clara happy. I tried to offer advice, practical suggestions about budgeting, about finding a second job. But Clara seemed to interpret my concern differently. She'd say, "You always understood me, Caleb. You always knew what I needed." Her voice would drop to a low, suggestive tone, an undercurrent of something unspoken. It made my skin crawl. One Tuesday evening, Sarah was away at an architectural conference in Chicago. I was home alone, making dinner, when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Clara standing on my porch, dressed in a silk robe that tied loosely at the waist, her hair undone. Her eyes were wide, glittering in the porch light. "Caleb," she whispered, stepping inside before I could react. The scent of her perfume, heavy and sweet, filled the air. I just, I had to see you. I can't take it anymore." She took a step closer, her hand reaching for my arm. The intention was clear, unmistakable. Her gaze was locked on mine, full of a desperate longing that bordered on predatory. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Clara," I said, my voice firm, "what are you doing? Sarah's not here, and this is not right." I felt a sudden, sharp clarity, a sense of protectiveness for my life, for my marriage, for Ethan. "I'm married, Clara, and Ethan's my best friend. You need to go home." Her face, which had been soft and pleading, hardened instantly. A flush of anger rose in her cheeks. "Fine," she snapped, pulling her hand back. "If that's how you're going to be, don't say I didn't try." She spun on her heel, the silk robe swirling around her, and marched out the door, leaving behind the lingering scent of her perfume and a chill in the air. The chill Clara left in my doorway lingered for days. It wasn't long before the subtle shifts began. At a casual get-together with some old high school friends, I noticed hushed conversations would stop when I approached. Smiles seemed a little too tight, glances a little too quick. It was nothing overt, just a feeling, a vague sense of unease. Sarah, with her keen eye for human interaction, noticed it too. "Is something going on with Clara?" she asked one evening, her voice calm but direct, as we sat at the kitchen island. "I felt a weird vibe from some of our friends, like they're talking about you." I looked at my hands, resting on the cool granite. The time for keeping it quiet was over. "Clara came to the house last week," I started, my voice low, "while you were at your conference." I recounted the entire uncomfortable encounter, the silk robe, her words, her desperate advances, and my clear rejection. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to make trouble. Not for you, not for Ethan. I just wanted to forget it." The admission felt like a heavy weight lifting. Sarah listened, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. "I'm hurt you didn't tell me, Caleb," she finally said, her voice soft but with an underlying firmness. "We don't keep things like that from each other." She paused, then added, "But I understand why you did it. You were trying to protect everyone." Her understanding was a balm, but the sting of my deception remained. From that day, I made a conscious effort to distance myself from Clara. I stopped answering her calls, letting them go to voicemail. My interactions with Ethan also became more guarded, more infrequent. It felt like a necessary wall, a boundary I needed to erect. Ethan, however, didn't understand. His calls grew less frequent, then stopped entirely for a few weeks. When he finally did reach out, his voice was strained, confused. "What's going on, Caleb?" he asked. "You've been acting weird. You avoiding me?" "No, Ethan," I said, trying to sound convincing, but the words felt hollow. "Just busy. Work's been crazy." The lie tasted like ash. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth, not yet. Then came the call that stunned me silent. "Caleb," Ethan began, his voice barely a whisper, a mix of guilt and relief. "I need to tell you something. I've been seeing someone." My gut tightened. "Who, Ethan?" I asked, a sense of dread creeping in. "Bethany," he said. "Bethany Clark." The name hit me like a physical blow. Bethany, the Miss Piggy who had betrayed me, the one who had set this whole twisted chain of events in motion so many years ago. It was a vicious circle, a repetition of history that made my head spin. I remembered the pain, the humiliation, the cold clarity of her deceit. And now my best friend. "Bethany?" I repeated, my voice flat, hollow. "Ethan, you're doing this with Bethany?" I know," he rushed, preempting my judgment. "It's messed up. But Caleb, you don't understand what it's like here. Clara, she just criticizes me constantly. Everything I do, everything I say, and the money, man. It's never enough. She's cold. She barely looks at me anymore. His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. Bethany, she makes me feel like I'm worth something. She listens, she's kind, she understands. I leaned my head against the cool glass of my office window, looking out at the unchanging Midwestern sky. Ethan, you need to stop, I said, my voice measured. You need to end this. You and Clara need to face your problems, not run from them by hurting other people. It was the same advice I'd given him years ago about Clara, about chasing a married woman. Now he was the one doing the chasing, the one betraying. He was silent for a long moment. I don't know if I can, Caleb, he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. It's, it's like a drug, the comfort. I feel alive again. The cyclical nature of it all, the betrayals echoing through the years, was a bitter pill to swallow. Bethany, the catalyst, now the accomplice. Clara, the object of desire, now the cold, demanding wife. Ethan, my loyal friend, caught in a trap of his own making, repeating patterns he should have learned from. Sarah, seeing the distress on my face after my call with Ethan, sat beside me. He's your friend, Caleb, she said gently, her hand on my arm. He needs someone to help him make the right choice, even if it's hard. I nodded, but the path wasn't clear. How do you help a friend who keeps digging himself deeper without enabling his destructive patterns? How do you offer a hand up without letting him pull you down into the mess he's created? It was a question without an easy answer. The phone call with Ethan had left me with a bitter taste. His confession had confirmed my worst fears, and a knot of unease had settled in my stomach. A few days later, I was driving through town, on my way to pick up some lumber for a weekend project, when I saw them. Ethan's familiar truck was parked on a side street, not far from Bethany's old house. A moment later, I watched Bethany step out, a small laugh escaping her lips as Ethan followed, locking his door. They walked down the sidewalk together, too close, too comfortable. The sight, stark and undeniable, was a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was real. I couldn't stand by and watch this unfold. Not again. Not with Bethany, the very person who had taught me a harsh lesson in betrayal. And not with Ethan, my oldest friend, repeating a pattern that would only lead to more pain for everyone involved. The thought of Clara, even with all her flaws, being unknowingly wronged, stirred a familiar ache of discomfort. I called Ethan later that evening. We need to talk, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. He agreed, sounding apprehensive. We met at a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind with worn booths and weak coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a harsh glow on our faces. I saw you, Ethan, I began, my gaze unwavering. With Bethany. You told me yourself you were having an affair. I saw you leaving her house. He flinched, his eyes darting away, then back to me, a flash of defiance. It's not what you think, he mumbled, pushing his coffee cup around. You don't understand, Caleb, what my life is like with Clara. I understand enough, I countered, my voice low but firm. I understand what it's like to be lied to. I understand what it's like to be cheated on. And I understand that you're hurting Clara and you're making a mess of your life. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. You end it, Ethan. You end it with Bethany, and you figure things out with Clara. Or I can't be part of this. I can't be your friend while you're doing this. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Ethan stared at me, his face a mask of conflict. His shoulders slumped, and he ran a hand through his thinning hair. You don't know what you're asking, he whispered. She makes me feel human again. He was unwilling to give up the solace Bethany offered, the easy comfort that masked the deeper problems. As I drove home from the diner, a renewed sense of responsibility settled over me. To Sarah, who had stood by me, who deserved honesty and loyalty. To myself, to the values I had tried to live by since leaving Michigan years ago. I had to draw a line, even if it meant risking the oldest friendship I had. But despite my words, Ethan didn't end it. Weeks passed, and the silence from him was deafening. I heard snippets of gossip through other friends. Ethan and Bethany were still together, still being discreet, but not discreet enough. My frustration grew, a slow burn in my gut. He was choosing this path knowingly. One late afternoon, the anger finally solidified into action. I drove to Bethany's street, the familiar suburban landscape unchanged, yet charged with a new, uncomfortable energy. I parked a few houses down, turned off the engine, and waited. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. My phone, cold in my hand, was off. The interior of the car grew dim. The porch light flickered on at Bethany's place. And then, there they were. Bethany, emerging from the front door, her hand still resting on Ethan's arm, a gesture too casual for a simple goodbye between old friends. When her eyes found mine, the color drained from her face, leaving her stark white, like fresh snow. Her gaze flicked away, landing on her shoes, then the sidewalk, anywhere but me. Ethan, slow to catch on, started to lift his hands, a placating gesture, as if to calm a dog. It was too late for that. The words came out flat, hollow. "Neither of you are worth wasting my time on," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet evening. I didn't wait for a reply. I just slid off the hood, opened the door, and got in, leaving the idling engine to speak for itself. The Taurus coughed to life, and I pulled away without looking back, leaving them standing there, exposed in the dim light, to face the choices they had made. The quiet hum of the Taurus's engine was still fading when my phone rang, vibrating hard against the console. It was Ethan, I answered. "What the hell was that, Caleb?" he roared, his voice thick with a fury that crackled through the speaker. "You meddling son of a bitch! What gives you the right to show up at Bethany's place, embarrassing me?" I kept my voice even, calm. "I wasn't meddling, Ethan. I told you where this was headed. You ignored it. I saw you, and I decided to lay out the truth one last time. You were hurting Clara. You were hurting yourself. And Bethany? She's just repeating old patterns. Someone had to make you see it." There was a tense silence on his end, punctuated by a harsh breath. "Yeah, well, you succeeded," he said, the anger still there, but now laced with something else. Defeat. "It's over with Bethany. Clara found out. Not from you, oddly enough. She just knew, or someone told her. Doesn't matter now." He paused. "She wants a divorce." The news, though expected, still hit me with a quiet thud. "I'm sorry, Ethan," I said genuinely. "Sorry?" he scoffed. "It's all a mess. She's going for everything. Lawyers, paperwork, digging up every argument we ever had. She's vindictive, Caleb. You have no idea." The divorce proceedings dragged on, a bitter, draining battle. Clara, true to Ethan's word, was relentless. The legal fees mounted, and what little savings Ethan had left were quickly eaten away. He lost his job at the lumberyard, the pressure and distraction having made him careless. His calls became less frequent, then stopped. When he did reach out, it was often to lash out, to blame me for his unraveling life, for the meddling that had set everything in motion. Despite his anger, I couldn't completely abandon him. When he had to move out of the house, I showed up with my truck, helping him pack boxes, loading his meager possessions into a small, cheaper apartment. We didn't talk much, the silence between us heavy with unspoken resentment and a shared, painful history. Bethany tried to surface again during this period. She called my cell, left a voicemail offering apologies, claiming she'd just been trying to help Ethan, that it was complicated. One afternoon, she even showed up at my office building, looking hesitant. She started with soft words, then justifications, trying to frame herself as a victim of circumstance. I just looked at her, my face devoid of expression. I simply shook my head, turned, and walked away. There was nothing left to say. Sarah and I talked about it often, late into the evenings, the lost friendship with Ethan, the emotional toll of his choices, the collateral damage. "It's hard to watch someone you care about make such a mess," Sarah said, her voice quiet. "But you did what you could, Caleb. You spoke your truth. That's all you can do." I felt the sorrow, the deep ache of a friendship broken, but also a growing sense of peace in my own choices, in the solid ground Sarah and I had built together. Years passed, the details of Ethan's life faded, replaced by my own quiet routines. Then, one Saturday morning, I was at the hardware store picking up paint. I saw him at the checkout, pushing a cart with a few cleaning supplies and a bag of instant coffee. It was Ethan. He looked older, worn, his shoulders slumped. He was wearing a faded work uniform, a logo for a local fast food joint stitched over the pocket. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. They were older, sadder, but there was no anger now, just a quiet resignation. Caleb, he said, his voice raspy. Ethan, I replied, the name feeling both familiar and strange on my tongue. I was wrong, Caleb, he said, his gaze dropping to the floor. About a lot of things. About Clara, about Bethany, about you. He swallowed hard. You were right about all of it. I didn't want to see it. He finally saw the consequences, laid bare by years of hard living and regret. We stood there for a moment, the sounds of the busy hardware store swirling around us. We talked, not about the bitterness, but about the past, about old baseball games and shared dreams, a quiet, melancholic conversation that acknowledged the weight of what had been lost and the price paid for choices made. The enduring power of moral choices. Infidelity had broken more than just a marriage. It had fractured a lifelong friendship, leaving scars that time could only dull, not erase. I carried the sorrow of that broken friendship, a heavy weight, but also the lightness of a clear conscience, the strength of my solid marriage with Sarah. My life in Michigan was stable, grounded. I carried the past, yes, but I looked forward with a quiet, resolute calm.